When the spy fall, Gallifrey crumbles, we will stand tall, face it all at Spyfall. I wonder how many subscribers that Adele parody just cost me. Alright everyone, welcome to my review of Doctor Who Series 12, Episode 2, Spyfall Part 2. Whew, a lot of twos in that name. A lot of you may remember from my last review of the first part of Spyfall that I didn't particularly love that episode. Well, this episode addressed a lot of my criticisms. There's still some things that I'm a bit hesitant on, but overall, this episode was amazing. I absolutely adored it. Honestly, one of my favorite Jodie Whittaker episodes so far, and definitely a top tier Who second parter. Now, this is something that Council of Geeks, another Doctor Who YouTuber, mentioned in their review. But second parters of Doctor Who don't tend to always be better than the first, and I will say, for me, this episode is actually better than the first part of Spyfall, and I was just here for it. And again, like I said, I have a few reservations which I'll get to at the end, mostly around the resolution of this episode. I just have a little bit of issues, but overall, phenomenal job in this episode. So first things first, we've got to talk about the Master. And I gotta say, I adore, and I'm gonna butcher his name, and I apologize for that, Shashat Daiwan? I'm really not good at pronouncing names, and so I apologize to the actor for getting his name most definitely wrong. But regardless, he does a, pardon the pun, masterful job in this role. He is menacing, but he is very charismatic. He feels strangely warm and yet very, very dark. And he walks this razor's edge of being just creepy. Every time I see him, I'm creeped out by him, and yet I'm kind of drawn to him and drawn to his very charismatic performance. It's very subdued in its menacingness, but it also feels very over the top too, and I can't put my finger on it, but his breathy voice, it just feels so dark and disturbing, yet it just fits the Master well. It fits the Master as this kind of boisterous person, and yet it kind of gets that, but it gets it across in a very toned down way that just, I think, works brilliantly for this character. And so when he does have those moments of exuberance, like when he comes in with the miniaturizer thing in the steampunk shop, he's just hamming it up, and it really feels natural to him, and yet it still feels very grounded and dark and disturbing in those moments, and very just, again, menacing. So just a fantastic job, and I really love his performance alongside Jodie Whittaker. Every time those two are on screen together in this episode, I am just riveted. Those two have such a brilliant chemistry back and forth. Like when he asked the Doctor to kneel, and Jodie kneels, and it was totally something she would do to try and save lives, but she just has this oh God, I don't want to do it. And he's just reveling in it, and you can just see her just being very uncomfortable with it, but knowing she has to do it. Just a fantastic job from both him and from Jodie. They, especially when those two are on screen together, again, I will say when they're on top of the tower, the Eiffel Tower, great scene between those two. You could feel that these two have a history together, despite the fact that this is only the second episode that we've seen these two actors together. You can feel the history that these characters have, and it's just fantastic performances. I think that's probably the standout of this episode, just the fantastic performances in those two characters in particular. The other thing I really liked about this episode is I loved all the idiosyncrasies and little bits of character that they gave to everybody. I loved that the episode started off with Jodie Whittaker's Doctor talking to herself. That felt very a doctor-y thing to do. And also, just kind of fleshed out her character as this version of the Doctor a little bit more than we've come to know her as. Because she, again, I loved Jodie in last season, but she didn't really have a fully formed identity as the Doctor as of yet, at least in my opinion. You may disagree, and that's totally okay. But I'm liking that we're starting to get a little bit more of these weird idiosyncratic moments that really just help flesh her out as her own Doctor. And it felt very her own, her talking to herself in that way of hi Doctor, hi, having that conversation. But it still feels very doctory. I mean, it reminds me of the 12th Doctor when he was giving a lecture in his own mind in the episode Heaven Sent. So, that is something that the Doctor does, but this is just a unique her spin on it. And so that I really kind of I just really liked that about this. And we also get a lot of like small moments too with the other characters. Like I loved Graham calling Ryan and Yaz donuts. That's such a unique word, and yet it felt very Graham. And I loved like Graham like having the shoe and like trying to shoot people with the shoe. It was just very fun. Ryan had some funny bits and like his fleshing out his relationship with Graham. Like they had a few jokes together and stuff like that. I will say, again, Yaz gets a little bit of the short shrift in this episode. We got a little bit with her last episode, but it kind of didn't stick. Like, there was no follow-up on that sort of PTSD that she may have experienced from being left behind in last episode, and that was kind of disappointing. The biggest shortcoming of last series was Yaz. As much as I liked her, I mean, I had no problems against her whenever she was on screen, but she never really got enough to do to make her really intriguing outside of the one episode Demons of Punjab. And so I was hoping, last episode that we were starting to see inklings of that, but it kind of gets dropped here. So that is a little bit disappointing, and I hope that they kind of pick that up as the rest of the series progresses, that we get a little bit more of Yaz. In fact, we're getting like more from Yaz's family than from Yaz in this episode, which felt a little bit disappointing. In terms of plot, I really, really enjoyed this plot. It felt a bit eclectic, like a lot of different things happening that didn't all tie together super well, but in those moments, in those sort of like time hopping different like planes of action in terms of time, they were a lot of fun. Like I loved the Doctor skipping through time. I loved her meeting Ada. I loved her meeting blanking on her name, but the French woman who was apparently a big decoder during World War II. That felt like a lot of fun. It felt like a cool concept of like her jumping through time, and then the Master just always kind of being like one step ahead of her to get there was just really kind of a cool, fun concept that I even wish they had played with a little more, like maybe had a couple more time jumps. But for what it was, they were a lot of fun in those moments that we got to see, and such a really fun concept. And then on the other side of things, with Yaz, Graham, and Ryan on the run, there were some cool menacing moments. It felt they're like, oh, we know I have everything on you. We know how to get to you, and they're able to find them. And then them like trying to turn the tails and like use that against other people, like saying like, oh, you know where we are? Well, we'll set a trap for you. It was a very fun turn for those characters, and like using their intelligence and their brains to sort of work their way out of a situation without the Doctor, and that felt like a lot of fun. So I loved those disparate pieces. Also, I should say the opening sequence with the airplane, with Ryan finding the little messages from the Doctor, hilarious, and like the recording and Graham's panicking were just absolutely hysterical. I that whole sequence just really worked for me. And then I liked the resolution at the end where they go like, well, how did you save us from the plane? And the Doctor's like, the plane. And we get to see her like going through and like laminating stuff and making all those things. That is actually that attention to detail there. I really enjoyed, like, her laminating the little like little thing that goes in the seat is honestly kind of hysterical and a lot of fun. It does beg the question why they don't do that more often, why the Doctor doesn't like go back and like set things up to save them more often. Maybe it's just because like it messes with the time stream too much. They could have probably put a little bit of a lampshade on that to make it work a little bit more, but as it is, it's a fun sequence in and of itself. A couple other small things that I really, really loved. I loved the return of the drum beats. When the Doctor started like messaging the Master with the drum beats, felt like a great bit of continuity. It sent chills down my spine, and it just worked really well. It was just a nice callback, very creepy, ominous, and just spoke to their relationship as characters, that they know each other that well. And so that was just a beautiful little piece of character development for those two. I also love how much this series, and even last series did this too, but I'm loving how they're just very much just doing everything they can to piss off the toxic fans. There's that one moment where Ada like shoots the gun and they're like, this wasn't designed for a lady, and she says, nothing is, but I seem to find myself quite capable. I love that sort of stuff. I know it's a bit of like pandering to the SJW agenda, but I enjoy it. It's fun for me. It works. It is pandering. Haha. I kind of like it, and I like that I know that other people hate it, that certain segments of the fan base that, I could really care less what their opinions are. I really kind of enjoy that. But at this point, it can't not be a poke at those people. And you know what? That kind of tickles me a little bit. And as I've always said, if you don't like Doctor Who, you have legitimate criticisms, you have issues with how the series is going, you have issues with the show, things like that, those are all legitimate. I just think there are certain segments of the fan base that have their own certain agendas that they are wanting to push that I just, I don't mind poking the bear a little bit. Oh, one other thing that I want to address before I get to the negatives is last episode I had a problem with the music, feeling that it was a bit too somber and a bit too overbearing. This episode fixed that. There was no point in this episode that I thought the music was a little bit too much or overbearing or out of place. The music in this was perfectly fine, and it didn't ring too big for me. Last episode, for some reason, I just noticed the music and it just threw me out of it. This episode, thankfully, did not have that problem. Okay, so I need to get into just a couple of the negatives. Like I said, I didn't think it was perfect. I think my main problems revolve around the resolution of this episode. I didn't particularly love that, at the end when everything's going off, like the big bomb thing, Deus Ex Machina is about to kill everybody on the planet, and then the Doctor just shows up aha, I fixed it off screen. I wish we had gotten to see that. All of this was just her trying to get to this place, and we also got to see Yaz, Graham, and Ryan get to this place, and they get there, and then the resolution just happens off screen. There's no clever bit or even character moment. It was just sort of oh yeah, we fixed it. We dealt with that. Don't worry about it. It happened off screen. And even Yaz, Graham, and Ryan didn't really add to that all that much. They did. In fact, I don't think they really did anything at the end in terms of stopping stuff. They just kind of got there. So yeah, it felt a little bit kind of a lackluster resolution there. Everything else leading up to that was great, but then it kind of felt like the writers got to the end oh yeah, we have this big mystery and big evil plan that we have to set off. I don't know. The Doctor just fixes it. So that was kind of a little bit frustrating. To be fair, I'm a bit okay with it because it felt like this episode was more about the relationship between the Master and the Doctor, as well as Yaz, Graham, and Ryan coming into their own as companions, and then also starting to question the Doctor a little bit, being yeah, we don't really know much about the Doctor. And so it felt a little bit more about those character relationships more in this episode. So I was fine with it in this episode, but considering that this was a two-parter, where the first part really set up this big, big mystery that, we were always trying to figure out, the fact that it was just sort of instantly resolved here at the end kind of felt a little bit, just kind of lame. This episode is definitely the stronger of the two, but in retrospect, it makes the first part even worse. Just all that setup kind of just kind of tossed out there. And the only thing really about the first episode that now, retroactively, that works for me is really the Master reveal. I feel without having rewatched it, I feel like if I ever go back and rewatch this two-parter, the only thing I'll really get out of the first one is oh, isn't that just a cool reveal with the Master? And then there's this cool second part with this big character building stuff and cool sci-fi concept. And then the first part just the rest of the first part just sets up this mystery that ultimately just kind of gets resolved like that. So that was a bit disappointing for me. The only other thing that I felt a bit disappointed by was I liked the concept of this big social media mogul being yes, we know all your information, we have all this stuff, very Facebook Mark Zuckerberg, a targeted point at him, a political statement in that vein, which I'm okay with. I don't mind when shows are that pointed with their political messaging, and that's something like Black Mirror does pretty much all the time, and a lot of other shows. And I think Doctor Who has done that and can do that. I mean, they did it last season with Kerblam and Amazon. I think that episode is one of the best of that season. And so I don't mind that as a plot device, but again, it kind of felt tacked on here. It didn't really come out of anything thematically in the episode, other than the fact that they were tracking Graham, Yaz, and Ryan. But there was no real social media is a big problem as sort of a theme throughout the episode. So the fact that it's just sort of the villain comes in and just kind of says it kind of is a bit disappointing. And also he doesn't, in fact, now that I think about it, nothing really happens with him, does he? He doesn't really get resolved. So maybe that guy will come back. He just kind of sets off this evil chain reaction, and then we never really deal with him. So it kind of felt a little bit like a forgetful thing. And he was set up really well. His scene with his mother was a really well executed villain scene. It was the necessary wahaha, I'm evil, here's my evil plan. But it gave him this menace and this actually built up his relationship with his mother. It made him feel very believable. It made him a very interesting, intriguing villain. And then again, it kind of just gets tossed away at the end. That it just felt, yeah, so just the plot resolution in this episode, and then the sort of like, here's this interesting like concept. Like, I mean, that whole Facebook thing could have been an episode of itself, that without all the time skipping stuff. So it just kind of felt sad that they kind of just like had all these intriguing ideas here, and then just kind of like just tossed them away at the end without really doing anything with them. So that's my main sort of big problem with the episode, is I just didn't really like the resolution and some of the wasted plot threads that they had. Also, one last thing that I want to mention in the negatives here before I get into the Timeless Child is I didn't like that there was a lot of like psychic stuff the Doctor was doing in this episode. Like she erased the memory of the two women at the end. I didn't mind her having a psychic connection with the Master. That a bit convenient, but I could live with it. But her erasing the memory of the two women just felt very Superman-y. Like, I'm gonna erase your memory, Lois Lane. And it just like an ability that I feel like should have come up earlier. Maybe it has in like classic Who and things like that. I know there's been hints of her being psychic before, like with Matt Smith, like giving Craig the download in the Lodger episode. But it just felt a little bit weird that that's an ability that she now has that would have probably been very convenient before this. That she can just erase memories of like future events and herself from people. So I didn't particularly love that was sort of an easy sort of get out of jail free card at the end there. They don't ruin the episode for me. I can kind of forget them. It just kind of a little bit disappointing at the end there, but the rest of the episode more than makes up for those detriments. And then the last thing that we need to talk about, and this is something that I'm super intrigued for, and it looks like is going to be the big Mystery Box season storyline, is Gallifrey and the Timeless Child, which was hinted at last season. And I really like the reveal that the Master was the one that destroyed Gallifrey, because they apparently hid something from them about this Timeless Child. And so that's obviously going to be the mystery box of the season. So I'm curious to see where that's going to go. But I like that, unlike previous mystery boxes, just like, here's this interesting thing, but never really tying it in. This does have an emotional core with, number one, the relationship between the Doctor and the Master, and also the Doctor and Gallifrey. So I'm liking that this mystery box setup is actually tied to something emotional for the character, and we kind of understand the emotional stakes of it right up front. And that kind of makes this whole, what will probably be the season-long arc, work a little bit more. So I think that is a brilliant, brilliant idea. I am a bit hesitant on the return to the idea of like the Doctor being kind of like, I don't want to talk about Gallifrey, as that felt like very well trodden ground during the Christopher Eccleston and David Tennant eras. Both David Tennant and Christopher Eccleston were kind of very hesitant to talk about Gallifrey and their history with it and their like trauma coming out of that and the Time War. And this kind of feels a little bit repetitious of that, with the Doctor sort of repeating that with her companions in this episode. So I hope that doesn't play out very similarly as we've already seen. And that she I was really hoping that the episode would just end with her opening up about everything. And the fact that she doesn't was just kind of a bit disappointing, because I'm like, okay, so we're going to kind of repeat this beat a little bit, and that feels a bit repetitive. So I'm a bit concerned about that. But final things and final bit that I will say before I wrap up is the thoughts on the Timeless Child. There's not much to say about it. I did get a very ones who walk away from Omi-Laws type vibe. For those of you who don't know, that is a brilliant Ursula Le Guin short story, basically where there's this society that is perfect, everyone's happy, but the one thing that everyone knows is that there is one child locked in a basement who is, has no love, is harmed, is abused, is just left to rot. And everyone knows this. And if anyone ever shows that child kindness, even the hint of kindness, all this utopia that they live in goes away. And so everyone just accepts it and says, okay, we're going to let this child suffer so that everyone else can be happy. But there are some people who walk away from Omi-Laws that say, I can't deal with that. I'm just going to walk away. It's a brilliant short story about like, what are you willing to sacrifice? It's just a really intriguing short story that I don't have enough time to psychoanalyze here. But that being said, it feels like that's kind of the setup that they're going with the Timeless Child. And I'm very curious if that sort of setup, because that is a really interesting and intriguing moral question, and would fit into the Doctor and the Master's histories, that they were the ones that walked away from Gallifrey. And so it would kind of add a really interesting moral conundrum to the Doctor's history. So that would be a very cool way to go with the Timeless Child. I'm very curious if my theory proves correct. I'd love to hear your thoughts, though, down in the comments below. Who do you think the Timeless Child is, or what the Timeless Child is? What did you think of this episode? Did you agree with my thoughts? Did you disagree with my thoughts? I'd love to hear all of it down below. And don't forget, if you don't want to miss any of my Doctor Who reviews or my upcoming Star Trek reviews or any of my cool other videos that I do on this channel, and I will say, this is a bit of a tease, but I'm very, very proud of the videos that I have coming out this month. I think this month, the videos that I have coming out are my best work that I've ever done on this channel so far, and I'm just very proud of it, and I'm very excited to show them to all of you. So please give a subscribe if that tease intrigues you in any way, shape, or form. And if you want to help make these videos even better, it would honestly mean the world to me if you could give even $1 over on my Patreon page. Every little bit helps me pay the bills, helps make these videos even better. So if you can give some money over on my Patreon, if you are able to just even give a little bit, would mean the world to me, and you get your own cool perks like your name on screen, just like these fine folks who should be up on the screen right now. But as always, regardless of if you subscribe or if you give to my Patreon, I'm just very glad that you joined me for this video, and as always, I hope that you live long and prosper. And special thanks to my commander level and above Patreons, Stefan Schuhart, Michael McGee, Boyd Earl, Law Lindley, Wellington Marcus, Munir Amlani, BBD, and Mari Nekar. Thank you so much to all of you and to all of my patrons. It really means the world to me. I cannot stress enough how much it really helps me out. So thank you all so much to all of my patrons, and especially my commander level and above patrons.